Welcome to Roll to Save, the RPG history podcast, Miniature Wargaming.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Roll to Save. This is our second Miniature Wargaming episode because when we finished recording the last one, we ended up having about another half-hour conversation off mic about stuff. And then Jason was like, we should really do another one. So here we are doing another one. And I'm joined as usual by Steve and Jason. How are we, gentlemen?
Yeah, all good. Bit of a shock seeing you so quickly after the last recording of an episode. So, but yeah, not bad, thanks.
Almost unprecedented, some might say.
It is, isn't it? It is.
It is. It's almost like we're on a regular schedule now. I've released 3 podcast episodes in as many weeks.
So you
It won't
lucky
last.
people.
It won't
Lucky
last.
It won't
people.
last. Although we have been getting requests for more episodes of The Assumptions, even as I keep churning them out. So we need to record the final episode.
I think we need to make that happen.
There's not much left. You know, need to sound all
Thanks for
doomsayery
that,
or
Mr.
anything.
GM.
Well, of this particular piece, obviously the career of the Assumptions may go much, much further.
Yeah, me. Anyway, Steve, you and I were talking the other week about buying various things for various models, and I was being very good in telling you how I genuinely have vowed not to buy any more plastic crack until I finish painting all the plastic crack that I've got. And you were lauding me for this. And what was the message you sent me yesterday?
I don't care to admit it. I almost managed to resist buying another starter box of Kill Team. I almost managed it. I didn't pre-order it or anything. I was going to pre-order. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Then I had a couple hours free yesterday. I was running errands. I'm like, I'm going to go to my local game store and just go chat to them because I don't get in very often. I walk out, $400 later in my wallet with a new Kill Team box, the new manual for it, another set that came out at the same time, and another game box. I bought a BattleTech Lance because I'm planning on getting the BattleTech starter box for Alpha Strike when it comes out in a couple months. So yes, I'm weak.
I could feel the shame coming off your text that you sent me.
It's only a matter of time, my friend, that you will fall into that too, because that is our curse when we're in this hobby.
Yeah, I've actually piled up all my stuff on my painting table over there, which obviously people can't see, and I've got just all these grey sprues. I even managed to find more models the other night that I've not painted. I found a box of Slay Industries Cannibal Sector 1 minis that I got as part of a Kickstarter like 3 years ago, and I hadn't even looked at. So for the Assumptions fans, I put together a nice little diorama of Bob, Bovril and Bob about to be killed by a machine. They were fairly rough casts, I have to say. There's a lot of cleanup to be done on those models, but it was nice to have some Slay, something a bit different from painting.
And the digger is huge, right?
The Digger model is huge. Yeah, for people who aren't that familiar with Slay Industries, Digger is one of the main characters, I guess. He's a enormous manchine, which is to say a cyborg that grafts human flesh onto himself. And I put this model together and it is huge. It's almost the same size as a Colossal from War Machine, which is to say it's about the size of an Action Man, which should hopefully mean it's easier for me to paint.
The weird thing that always struck me about Digger, sorry, a little bit of a tangent here, is right, Manchines were supposed to use human flesh so that they could, like Terminators, so they could pass undetected and stuff like this. This guy's, 28 feet tall or whatever it is. Thank God he draped himself with human flesh. We'd have seen him coming otherwise. I mean, it's madness.
It's just that normal, really tall guy. Oh, look, he's got scythes coming out his
exactly.
back. I've also been painting a whole ton of Space Marines. I've got a little Catalan Reavers squad sitting on the table over there. They're all in black, so I've bought a black spray can. And I have to say, I'm not having fun basing things in black. It turns out it's very difficult to paint over it. You have to essentially build all the colour up.
Beyond your patience. I don't think it's beyond your skills. It's just beyond your patience.
No, it's definitely beyond my skills. I've got patience to burn, but
I've got no real minis here because it's all in storage back in the UK. It's still there, and I've not.
You should buy some.
Oh, yeah, you say that. I mean, I ended up with the some minis from the Kickstarter for Iron Kingdoms, Borderlands and Beyond. So Shadow of the Seeker, there was some minis in there. So I've ended up with half a dozen, basically Retribution elves that, oh well, they're pretty. And so, but that's it. So, and I've got nowhere to paint. So this is what I'm saying. I was talking to a friend of ours, Rob, and he's trying to get me to get into Malifaux. So I've been looking at the figures there, and I've decided what I want to buy. I know exactly what I'm going to go and get. But I'm staving it off because I've got nowhere as a hobby space to set it up and paint and assemble this stuff. And as we've discussed previously, while I don't mind what other people do, I'm not going to field anything that isn't painted. Not that I'm going to get to field anything for a while anyway. But I need to find out how many nerds there are in Ireland. Okay, I need to knuckle down, get on the internet, find out. I mean, we've got a dice shop. And other stuff, Dakota Irish, just down the road from where I am. So there is a nerd population. It's just well underground and hidden.
You don't need that much space for a hobby desk. Come on, I mean, you can fit a hobby desk in some pretty compact spaces if you're not.
It's not the space. It's just not my house, dude.
It's
bad enough I've got this PC set up here with monitors and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Can you not see it's for work? See all these little pots of paint.
That's how I got away with it for the PC. So I suppose it could work. I'm desperately hoping that the house situation might be sorted relatively soon, and then all of this ceases to be an issue, and then I'll just press buy, and I'll have loads of little minis to winging their way to me to sit there in my pile of shame for a good few months before I finally get round to painting them.
Join us.
I went to my local gaming shop recently. And in fact, to go in to buy the aforementioned black spray paint, the guy behind the counter, I could see, was assembling some of the Horus Heresy models from the box set. And I was like, oh, Horus Heresy, what faction do you play? And came home from the shop. And my wife was like, you were gone for ages. I was like, I could talk to this guy. He was really nice. And he was telling me how the shop does tournaments. And I could feel her just staring into my very soul with that. Nope. Enough of this nonsense.
Your poor long-suffering wife.
I know, poor her. So one of the things that we were going to talk about last time, which we never got round to, is as well as the main or the big miniature war games that there are out there are a ton of other games that either use miniatures or miniatures are a big part of them. And one of the things we were chatting about, which seems to be a good focus for this one, is there were a whole series of games released by Games Workshop in the 80s that their selling point was they came with an absolute ton of minis. And in fact, Games Workshop paired up, I think it was Milton Bradley as well, to release some games in their line as well that had a ton of minis. And I'm thinking of things like Space Hulk, Space Crusade, Hero Quest, all of that jazz. The games that weren't actually miniature games per se, you could essentially play them with counters, I guess, but they were made so much cooler by having miniatures. And I know, for example, I loved Space Crusade, and for those of you who don't know, Space Crusade's a game set inside a Space Hulk in Warhammer 40,000 universe, which is a giant floating derelict spacecraft, and on board were gene stealers, and you would send a squad of Terminator Marines in to take them out. And these gene stealers were represented in the board initially by blips, a bit like in Aliens, where you've got a tracker and there's just little blips appear. And you don't know how many of them there are. There could be one, there could be three. And you had to complete various missions while these things swarmed out. And it was made so much better by the fact that the gene stealers and the Terminators were all represented by beautiful little plastic models. The game itself was pretty good.
Space Crusade, I absolutely loved Space Crusade. Those, as you say, those little blips, and it kind of gave you that sense of foreboding and stuff as they moved towards you. These little blips, you didn't know what they were. But yeah, awesome with the minis. As you say, you could easily have done it with just counters. Little square bits of cardboard that said, heavy bolter or whatever. But But yeah, we're so much cooler with the minis, absolutely. And there's a few I've bought relatively recently that've done similar things, sort of cool minis, and it definitely sways my purchasing decision if there's a nice couple of minis in there.
Oh yeah.
What's one of your recent ones?
So I bought a Judge Dredd one. And I was trying to remember exactly what it was called because there was a particular form of it. So it was a 2000 AD. It's called Judge Dredd, but it's actually a 2000 AD one. And you get these crews, and you've got to go. It's all about a fractured reality, and you have to collect these little reality tokens. And you've got Strontium Dog crew. You've got Judge Dredd crew, and there's two other crews as well. There's a Slania crew as well. So if you like that kind of stuff, so you've got to. It's 4 different crews. I'm trying to remember what the other one was now. That's going to bug me. I'll figure it out later. But yeah, and so you've got these nice 4-man teams, nice little plastic models. There's part of me desperately wants to paint them. And they've all got slightly different abilities. So if you're paying Johnny Alpha, then he's got a particular set of skills you can use if you've got these. But it's all about playing cards and setting up your turn based on what cards you play and spending movement and actions and things. But yeah, very cool. Oh, and the House on Haunted Hill as well. The Betrayal at the House. Betrayal at the House of the Hill. Yeah, it's a quality game. There's just released a 3rd edition as well. So I was tempted to have a look at that at some point.
You could go down a total rabbit hole on board games.
Oh, yeah. You started this, Iain. Yeah.
But yeah, no, Space Crusade, Advanced Space Crusade, Hero Quest, Battle Masters, the MB partnerships with GW, I'm sure, were huge gateways for a lot of people. And it's kind of interesting to see that they've re-released HeroQuest without GW as a partner now, and had to remove any sort of GW IP from it. But it's basically the same game or a similar game. And they did the equivalent of a Kickstarter for it. I don't think it was on Kickstarter, but it was crowdfunded, and it was hugely popular. And that just came out earlier this year. And I didn't pick it up myself personally because, honestly, I don't need any more massive games. I'm not going to play right now.
Yeah, but you got Blackstone Fortress came out recently as well. That was a few years ago now.
Yeah, I mean, well, see, GW branched off of HeroQuest to do Warhammer Quest, right? That was their officially branded non-MB partnership game, Warhammer Quest. So they've done a bunch of editions of that over the last probably 20 years. The original ones are pretty highly sought after. They're still set in the old world. And then they've done like 2 or 3 boxes of it in Age of Sigmar world, which, again, really cool stuff with regards to getting first releases of new heroes and things like that you can then later pull into, mainstream Warhammer, or just because they're cool. I love that sort of stuff. And then Blackstone Fortress was their first foray into Warhammer Quest for 40K. Yeah. Which, great game. Had a lot of fun with Blackstone Fortress.
And there was a lot of minis.
Yes.
A lot of minis.
And for example, there's another great example of highly sought after minis that had not been sculpted or had never had sculpts before that are people wanted for 40K. The Trader Guard, right? First new squad of Trader Guard for God knows how long, if ever, came in Blackstone Fortress. And so, as you can imagine, people are carving up Blackstone Fortress boxes to start building up a Trader Guard force. And then they released a Commissar as well, or whatever he's called in the Trader world, as well as a Chaos Ogre in there too. So you're building up a new faction, or new-ish faction, out of a board game for the mainstream game. And they've done this a few times. And again, as I raved about last time, I love that stuff. I love when they use their extended board game properties to just extend the IP and make new stuff that they wouldn't necessarily do mass market in their main game, because you can't build an entire army out of it immediately.
Yeah, they did that with Horus Heresy as well. They released a couple of board game-esque box sets for that. It was the Burning of Prospero and Battle at Calth. I think
Betrayal at Calth, yes.
Betrayal, that's it. Yeah.
Highly sought after.
The models for those were gorgeous. Mm-hmm. Absolutely gorgeous. But as you say, a lot of them were exclusive to that board game set. And of course, you're drawing people in through the medium of board games to play in their main cash cow hobby. That was the one reason they had the whole Milton Bradley alliance back in the late 80s, was exactly that. Is, I think you put it, as a gateway to the wider hobby. And I know there was people who I knew who played HeroQuest who'd never played a role-playing game or Warhammer or anything like that before. And then suddenly, when they were releasing expansions for HeroQuest, which you could buy in the Games Workshop's shop, they were suddenly like, oh, look at all this other cool stuff there is in here. And before you know it, they're hooked on buying armies of other things. And those two, I think Space Crusade and HeroQuest, were probably indirectly responsible for getting more people into the hobby. We joked in a episode way back that, you know, fighting fantasy game books were responsible for getting people into the role-playing hobby. I think Space Crusade and HeroQuest were probably the same, but for the miniature wargaming hobby, that people who wouldn't normally play suddenly realised there was this whole world of cool little plastic models and that they could build up bigger forces of them.
Yeah, and it's strange. It's that recently, you asked again what more recently stuff. The other Kickstarter I backed is Monster Apocalypse, which by Privateer Press, and that was released as a miniature war game a while ago, but they've actually entered into a partnership with a board game company to produce this board game set of Monpoc, as they've been referring to it. So, and the whole thing is you buy it as a 4-player set, and then you're off and running, rather than everybody having to go out and buy a faction and buy. And it comes with some buildings and maps and stuff like that. So, I talked about getting into it a little while ago, because who doesn't love smashing monsters and robots and, destroying city skylines and things like that, So, but never kind of had the kind of right kind of entry level to it, whereas this seemed to be the right entry level. You could buy a 2-player set or you can buy a 4-player set. Obviously, I've gone for the 4-player set, and it's come out of things like playing King of Tokyo with friends, and just a tiny little board game, kill some time thing, and it's like, well, this is almost like advanced version with proper miniatures and things like
advanced
that.
King of Tokyo.
Advanced, yeah. Well, no, I mean the King of Tokyo. It's not. They're not the same game. They're not related in any way, shape, or form, other than big smashing monsters laying waste to cities. But King of Tokyo is such a great little board game to play, very easy to pick up, very easy to enjoy, and I've managed to get the next gen, as I've started calling Shirley's kids, into playing these kind of games, and I'm damn sure that I'm going to unpack Monster Apocalypse, put it in front of them, and they're going to be like, well, we're in for that. And as you say, it's gateway.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of a lot of these games. We talked about it in the last podcast, that one barrier to entry with miniature wargaming, apart from the sheer unadulterated cost, is you buy this box, you take it home, and then you're spending hours and hours and hours putting these models together. Whereas the models that come with these board game style miniature wargames, they tend to either already be assembled or require very minimal assembly. And therefore you've got this spectacle set up straight away. As we said, you could play it with counters, but it looks so much more visually appealing when there's 3D representations of what you're messing around with. And that's the beauty of these ones. It's all ready to go straight away out the box. You don't have to spend time monkeying about with glue and putting super glue in your fingers and having that clog up your pores. That's personal experience around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, GW is doing a better job of trying to, with push fit and easy to assemble, they're trying their best with some of their newer games and some of their newer releases to make it so it's a lower barrier for people having to deal with multi-part kits, which are, again, is, if you talk about tiers of newbie versus newbie doesn't know what they're doing, no clue, doesn't even want to deal with glue because maybe they're a little kid and, their mom and dad don't want them messing around with plastic glue, right? Because it's fumey and you don't want it in your house, right? These push-to-fit kits are now a new way to get people to you clip them out and they don't always have a great fit together, but they usually work okay. If you're a pro modeler, you're going to turn your nose up about it and going to clip all these pegs off and glue them together and scrape off all the gaps and stuff. But for people who just want to get a game in quickly, you clip these things out, put them together in 5 minutes. So much easier barrier for entry. That they're trying their best, because I don't think they'll ever, or rarely will they ever go to where it's like a single pose, fully assembled mini for GW. That's Citadel. I don't know when the last time they did that.
I'd be interested to see when they do the Kinder Egg tie-in, because that's the next step, I guess. If that happens, you heard it here first. GW are coming for you. Right? Actually, they've got good lawyers. I'm not going to touch them. Right?
It's true though, Steve. The other day I was putting together 5 Space Marines, and the amount of bits, and I love the fact they're not monopose. You can put these bits together in any different combination and make them into your guys, but it's not something for your newbie modeler, because you're like, oh, I've got to put shoulder pads on, I've got to stick like little accessory bits on it, I've got to glue the head into the body and then get the body glued into the waist and then somehow get the arms together without him dropping whatever he's holding. It's very much a more advanced skill set. Whereas if you're new to it, you just want to get the box opened and start playing as soon as possible. And I think the board games are made with that in mind. They're not aimed at modelers. They're aimed at regular consumers. I remember Space Crusade, I think the Gene Stealers, they came with arms and a body, and you just kind of slotted the arms into the body. There wasn't any, I don't recall any gluing.
No, Steve's alluded to it several times. This is a multifaceted hobby, right? You've got playing the game, you've got collecting the stuff, you've got putting it together and painting it, and not everybody's going to want to do all of that stuff. So, if you've got a massive army that you have to build and engage with that hobby section of the construction side of the hobby first before you play it, well, that's a third. If people aren't into that, you've just lost those people. So the quicker you can get them into the game, the better. They can always spend time later painting it or doing something nice with it.
There was one of those sort of board game era games that I absolutely loved, and that was Blood Bowl. And again, for people who might not be familiar with it, Blood Bowl was essentially American football set in a kind of tongue-in-cheek version of the Warhammer universe. And the initial version that was released way back was actually a cardboard board game. It came with little figures and stands and a cardboard board. And then they released a version that came with this massive polystyrene pitch. It had end zones where you had little plastic names of the teams you could put down there. It came with all this lore. And as I said, some of it was actually quite funny. And you get 2 complete teams of humans and orcs to go and battle out. But then, of course, Games Workshop being Games Workshop, they were like, of course, you do want to play other things. And so they released a whole model line to go along with Blood Bowl. And I know one of the things they did, which I've never seen them really do before, is you get little numbers you could put on the players' backs. And one of the reasons for this was if you wanted to proxy and play as a different faction and just use the basic things you had out the box, it let you say, okay, player number 1 is actually a dark elf, player number 2 is a goblin, whatever. And you could build up a team that way. And then, of course, they went and released lots of lovely miniatures. Like, of course, you could just buy a whole team, and here they are. But did you guys play Blood Bowl?
Yeah, yes. Yeah. I'm not going to enthuse quite so much as you. I mean, I kind of like the sort of sports ball crossover into the fantasy stuff. And you're right. Some of the lore was done very amusingly, like the Dark Side Cowboys is the Dark Elf team and things like that. And you could have treants and you could basically pick anything from the Warhammer Fantasy Battle universe and put it into Blood Bowl, which made for some crazy kind of stuff. But it did just kind of devolve into 2 lines of people hitting each other, in my experience. If you're going to do...
It just sounds like the sort of team you'd play, Jason.
No, not at all.
Playing my elegant Dark Elves who played a brilliant throwing game.
I don't know. Maybe it's the lack of appreciation on my part for the glory of American football, but it didn't really work for me. I've mentioned it before. Guild Ball, in my opinion, was a much better sports ball game for fantasy, and it didn't even have any other races in it. Well, had a bear and a wolf. But there was no real magical races in it, so to speak. But maybe that's just because I prefer soccer to American football. I don't know. But yeah, I still played it, and I still enjoyed it. Just, I don't have the fond reminiscing, perhaps. If somebody landed me a copy on eBay tomorrow, I'd be like, meh, sorry.
I mean, they're still making it today, and it's still it's still one of their bigger sellers as far as
I'll be crucified for that.
Secondary games. And even more so, like, and this is something I didn't mention earlier, is they've branched off into retail bookseller versions of the games, which is kind of a harkening back to the old days. So you can go into your Barnes & Noble over here, which for our non-US listeners is one of the biggest bookseller retail chains in the US. In fact, one of the only ones that's left in the days of Amazon. And so they're doing like these smaller versions of their main sort of box products. So they'll have for example, for Blood Bowl, there's a smaller version called Blitz Bowl, which you can get they're actually really good value for money because they're basically the same minis as you get with Blood Bowl, but it's a smaller set, and so you can get really good value for money. And the same is true for, there's a Space Marine Adventures game where you can get a few classic Space Marine sculpts in there. There's there's even a new Warcry version, which is, Bladeborn, I think it's called. So they're trying to go back to that old, let's get not just the folks who are wandering past like a Warhammer store which are at random malls here and there. It's like any Barnes & Noble in the board game section, which if you're probably like me and Ian, if you're in a Barnes & Noble, that's usually where we end up first, is let's go to the board game section and then probably the comic section and so on, because those are the cool nerdy sections. And you're going to see GW
reading nonsense.
Yeah, none of these like non-fiction shenanigans. It's all the geeky stuff. So you're going to find those at the same place you're going to find Settlers of Catan and all these other mainstream board games, Monopoly. You're going to find GW products there, which is, I can't say for how successful it is, but I love seeing GW products in the mainstream like that. And it's just kind of shows that Blood Bowl is one of their marquee products in there, and it's on like season 3 there, and they've really capitalized on that. It's got like a third version of the video games coming out soon. Blood Bowl 3 is coming out, and that was hugely popular. I mean, the game, to me, like, I can't play the game because it frustrates the crap out of me these days. Like, the push your luck, basically, you're basically screwed by the roll of a dice mechanic. Just, I don't have the patience for it anymore. And not like in my younger days. It drives me nuts to your entire strategy falls down because of a bad dice roll.
That's what we do, isn't it? That's the whole basis of everything we do. I mean, the amount of times I've seen, had my head in my hands because of a single failed attack or something like that. And yeah, frustrating as hell, I get it. But
I hadn't played Blood Bowl since the second edition. And I know in the second edition there was a mechanic in it, the sprinting mechanic, which was you could move number of squares equal to your movement, and then you had a sprint stat that was like extra movement you could do. But they seem to change that in the newer version where you can sprint, but it's like steal extra squares, is what Steve's alluding to. But if you roll, I don't know, a 1 or something in the dice, your player gets taken out. I'm guessing, I know he trips, or to use a Glaswegian example, he's hit by a bottle from the crowd, and it kind of wipes him out. And it was never something that was in the original version. The original was much more, you took your turn, the other guy took the other turn, and there wasn't this chance of random luck gods intervening. I have to say, the new models all look gorgeous from what I've seen there. They're really good looking models.
Yeah, they keep bringing out more and more stuff. It's really gotten to a renaissance, because for the longest time it was kind of like, we'll release a new version of the main box and we won't really do much to support it, and then we'll take it back off the shelves again. They released so many teams over the last few years. And not just regular GW, but they're releasing a bunch of Forge World stuff too, for resin, for star players and everything. It's pretty damn popular these days in a lot of ways. And I'm all for it, because they're great sculpts and we're all mini nerds, so I love it.
The original Blood Bowl had a rule in it, which we've alluded to a couple of times, that Jason and I are painting snobs and we won't field stuff that's not painted. And it's the only time I've seen a rule like this in any game, where you used to be able to buy cheerleader models for Blood Bowl. And if you had cheerleader models, each one was essentially a reroll that you could use during until like a touchdown was scored, and you lined them up on your sort of technical area. But it had the rule that if they're painted, each one's worth 2 rerolls. And I was like, good. My terribly painted.
Yeah, it doesn't say what standard they have to be painted to, does it?
If they're painted and your opponent says, actually, that's pretty good, it counts.
That should count.
Otherwise,
3.
if they look and go, Iain, why are your cheerleaders all brown? Because Iain can't paint.
Because they were next to the Skaven slaves that I did the previous day. The 3-dimensional thing is a massive thing. We go back to the board games of these figurines. I mean, I've been playing I played some competition War Machine a little while ago, and everybody uses 2D terrain, and I get it. Well, for making sure measurements are accurate and all this kind of stuff. But what attracted me to the hobby was seeing, big monsters and mass ranks of cavalry and infantry on a 3D battlefield with houses and rivers and trees and stuff like that. So, you add these into a board game and as eye candy, yeah, I'm in. Just sign me up. Just take my money.
That's why Hero Quest looked so good, because you had all that random dungeon furniture that, you'd go into a room and the guy who was effectively the GM there'd be an Iron Maiden in one corner and like a torture bench or something.
An alchemist table with all flasks on it and all that kind of stuff. Fantastic.
Exactly. You could search this stuff. That you take an action to like go through there and see if there's any loot. And it just made it so much more engaging than having a flat board with a room stenciled out on it that torture room, go in there and get stuff, and just having those little 3D doors that had an open and closed version, it just added something to the ambience, and as you say, kind of brought it to life. I too used to play War Machine, and when you play in a competition, and it was there to make it more accurate, but when your scenery was essentially a mouse mat that was dumped in the middle of the table.
Doesn't look quite so good, does it? Doesn't look quite so good.
No, it doesn't look good.
I wouldn't, if I was playing a competition, I'd almost insist on 2D terrain because, especially with War Machine, like little fractions of an inch or whatever make a massive difference. And 3D terrain does get in the way, but I spent not a huge amount. I spent a chunk of money on terrain before I left the UK, just because I wanted to make sure that my table, when I was playing these casual games with friends of mine, looked the part. And more people I've been talking to are doing that now, and particularly things like Malifaux, when you're getting things like steam trains and a big kind of wharfs with docked boats and things like that you can play these games around, and that's really cool. And I'm looking forward to playing games on that level of terrain more than getting back into the competitive scene. Definitely.
Yeah, that reminds me. Here's something I was going to mention that links well into this. As I mentioned at the start, I was in my local game store yesterday, chatting with the manager,
spending huge amounts of money.
Fun. Yes, this was before spending huge amount of money. I hope you're proud of me because I resisted strongly the urge to get a third game's models there. There's a new newish skirmish game that they just started to supply. Is called Mythos. It's a Cthulhu Mythos skirmish game where there's a bunch of different resin factions box sets that are, you basically get a box and that's your team. The minis are beautiful. The only reason I didn't get it was because I didn't want to deal with resin, even though he said the resin was some of the best he's ever dealt with, right? That he was really happy with the resin compared to anything. I just didn't want to deal with super glue. So I'm like, I'm just not going to mess with that, even though I was super tempted. So that was part one of that conversation. Part two was he showed me some of the terrain that they were kind of packaging with it. And it was like, it's one thing to try and picture, like, because they didn't have any on the shelves, but it's like 3D MDF terrain, pre-painted terrain of like fishing, like spooky sort of like Lovecrafty fishing village and like spooky church stuff. And I'm like, that's like, if I'm going to play a game like that, that's, you sure as hell I want stuff like that. That's going to add so much to the ambience of playing a skirmish game with these Cthulhu-esque miniatures. Like, and that's great. Like, Love that stuff. Just I resisted the impulse to get yet another game.
One of the first games I remember that came with terrain like that was Adeptus Titanicus and its companion game Space Marine. And Adeptus Titanicus was Games Workshop's essential answer to Robotech or MechWarrior. It's giant bipedal war machines called Titans duking it out with each other. And it was more like a skirmish war game than a board game because you could play it on the kitchen table. But to make the game interesting, it came with a load of cardboard scenery for high-rise tower blocks and basically a cityscape, because a big part of this game was maneuver and using cover. And it just brought this game to life, that having these giant machines and being able to walk alongside skyscrapers or hide behind skyscrapers while you're trying to get the enemy. And Space Marine, it was its companion game that was for infantry and armoured vehicles and used lovely 15mm miniatures. It came with buildings as well because you wanted this game to look like you were fighting in an urban battlefield rather than just lining up two huge hosts of tiny 15mm models and going at it. But just having that scenery come with it. And this was another game where the models were basic snap together things. The Titans themselves were designed that the arms came off because we'd want to change the loadout of your giant mech. So you would basically pop this thing in a plastic base and then pop on the arms you want and then take them off. You specifically were not meant to glue these things. And it was very, very easy to get started and start playing straight away. Did either of you ever play any of these epic, they called it epic scale, the tiny Games Workshop war games?
Play is a relative term. I watched people play it and I was super into wanting to play it, but it was one of those things where pocket money was spread thinly and I already invested in things like Space Hulk, Blood Bowl, 40k. So I to this day I love what they did with Epic because it certainly may have started like the way you described, Ian, and it certainly didn't end like that. Massive armies with lots of forces. Again, extending the lore of the game, bringing in stuff you're never going to see because of the scale and a larger 40k 28mm scale. You saw stuff in that game to this day that you're not going to see outside of someone kit bashing it in a larger scale. That's what I loved about that game the most. Again, extended the lore, brought new stuff into it, and you just got to get a better feel for these massive, massive battles.
It's true what you say about them changing its original intent, because when you bought Adeptus Titanicus, when it first came out, it was seen as a board game. It came with 6 of these Titans, 3 for each side, and a bunch of missions in the book, and you scored points for completing the missions, and whichever side had the most points won. And likewise with Space Marine, it came with 2 sets of armies that were fairly evenly matched, and the missions would dictate what forces each side would take, and again, you got points from it. And I think it was once it started selling well, and they started putting the odd article here and there in White Dwarf for, and here's some rules to put in these things, that they realised that, hey, we could sell a bunch of more models using this. And as you say, it spiraled wildly out of what the initial vision was and just became this. If 40k was originally seen as a skirmish war game that became a battle game, this was seen as a battle game with some guardrails around it that just became the instrument for fighting these huge apocalyptic battles where you've got like hundreds and hundreds of models on each side because they were tiny 15mm things. But as you say, it showed the ability to include stuff that you could never realistically model in 40k, because this, if you did model it, it'd be about 6 foot in real life.
So I never played in the GW stuff, so I was aware of it and I was aware of the sort of epic scale stuff, but all my small scale stuff was all sort of historical. So we're talking way before 40k. We're looking at like 15mm ancients and Napoleonics, and we're looking at 6mm ultramodern, 6mm World War II. So because miniature wargaming doesn't start and end with the GW stuff.
No,
There was a lot of stuff there, and I remember, fielding, companies of chieftain tanks and stuff on a battlefield and against mass Russian armor and stuff like that. And again, you're right. You get a scale of battle that you can't see. We did a recreation of Waterloo at one point in 25mm Napoleonics, and the room was just enormous. We had literally mapped out, and there were we went. Oh, this was incredibly nerdy. So you're gonna have to forgive me. We had there were multiple generals aside, obviously, as there were in the real battle, and every general had an actual aide de camp. So if you wanted to send a message to the other general, you didn't get to chat about it. You had to write it down or tell the aide de camp, and he would go and deliver the message to the other guy. And yeah, that was, but the scale of it was just huge, absolutely huge. It was fantastic. You basically had half of Belgium mapped out on a floor. We didn't have a table big enough. We couldn't even get enough tables to put together a table to be big enough. It was on the floor. It was the only way we could get anything big enough to do it.
I've often seen that with naval wargaming. There's a guy I'm friends with who still does a lot of, I don't know what the scale is, but
1/3000 was the scale I did with naval wargaming. So,
well, probably, yeah. And every time they refight a battle, because it's not quite the same as playing a sci-fi one, where it's like you set up your dudes, I set up my dudes, and we fight. It has to be. There's always some historical battle that they're refighting, and they always need a floor for it because modelling like the English Channel or part of the Pacific
Midway
really
or whatever.
easy.
Or,
yeah.
Just need a big blue cloth.
Yeah, there's not much terrain, to be honest.
No, not a lot of terrain.
You need to have a blue floor.
Yeah, and the problem obviously with naval stuff is the ranges are huge, right? So you're chucking, shells, many kilometers. So the scales get ridiculous. You get these tiny little boats, but they're ships and they're miles apart from their opponent. Obviously, if you did something like Napoleonic or recreate the Battle of Trafalgar or something like that, that would be a lot more up close and personal.
It's something I've always fancied, the historical war game. I love tabletop war games where you have the little cardboard counters with numbers and archaic NATO symbols on them. I love
Avalon
those.
Hill was your god at one point, wasn't it?
I've still got on my bookshelf opposite me a couple of Avalon Hill bookcase games, but I've never bought any miniature wargaming from a historical period. Not for any reason other than I've just never. I was tempted by Bolt Action. That was one made by Warlord Games that gets a lot of praise from a lot of folks. And indeed, Jay, the games club we used to play in, there was a group of people there used to play Bolt Action. And I used to always be really intrigued because I think with the historical ones, what you find is they're way more into painting than people who play fantasy or sci-fi, because there's a lot about getting the unit colours right.
The historical accuracy and stuff, if you get the right people, yeah. This is my Prussian force, and this is this battalion, and that's that battalion. Here's the right colours, and yeah, it can get. But I'm not saying I don't think that's necessary. I mean, I've seen games like that played where there've been unpainted miniatures, so it does. It's not a sort of a guarantee. I think the only reason I've got more historical wargaming experience is just because I'm older than you guys. When first edition Warhammer came out, I was there. I was on board. I bought me beaky Space Marines that are coming back into fashion and all that kind of stuff. But before that, it didn't exist very much.
You must have those fond memories of refighting D-Day, having actually been there at the time.
I was going to say I wish. No, I don't wish. I never wish to be involved in anything like that at all. But yeah, no, it's more. So I've done World War One, air-to-air combat. Well, all that kind of stuff. It's all been there, but there wasn't much of a fantasy equivalent. It did exist, but not in the same sort of spaces. I remember doing 15mm fantasy wargaming at an undead army. It was basically just as many skeletons as I could get on board at any one point in time. It was definitely a more Soviet strategy regarding manpower than anything else. So, but I can't even remember what it was called, 15mm, but that was pre kind of Warhammer and things like that. And so it was. I got into a miniature wargaming through that route. It was historical wargaming, or ultra modern. Obviously, that's not historical. We view it as historical, but World War III not having happened yet, it's a bit difficult. You can always fight a bit of a Q8 Iraq War or something. That was good.
Yeah, there was a game I saw when I went into my game shop recently that is, I think it's 15 million scale. It's an ultra modern one that's just been released. And one of the guys in the shop was putting together and painting up a load of stuff from that. And it looked really cool. It was a World War III type. I think actually it was Cold War, but World War III breaking out type scenario. And it looked really cool. Again, it's just because you've got massive ranks of armour and infantry, and that always looks good. And I think it's one of the reasons I've always preferred battle games to skirmish games. I think to me, part of the fun is that opening turn where everything's set up and it all just looks incredible. It's only the turns after that where it starts looking messy. We had an event actually when I was back in the UK, our local game shop. We fought a game of Warhammer that had, I think it was 3 people on each side. And each person brought like 2,500 points along, and the table was extended like way out. And we had this grand plan, we were going to play this in a day. And I think it got to about 4 p.m. and we'd taken 2.5 turns, and it was like, this is really slow. But it looked glorious when it was initially set up, except it took about 2 hours to set up.
That Waterloo reconstruction was played over a weekend, and there wasn't a huge amount of sleep. Okay, and it's just the thing is, you're right. It looked fantastic, but it takes so much time, and real life gets in the way. You can't dedicate that amount of time. For yourself, from setting up those Avalon Hill games, you've got to leave them set up. They take up, you've got to have a table you can leave and so forth. So it's difficult. Whereas the skirmish games, and we've discussed it, is just you can pick it up, run a game, be done in an hour, 2 hours, or whatever, and you get the hit without necessarily the investing of time and space.
I had that with War Machine. When we initially started playing War Machine, I went from playing Fantasy Battle with this Skaven army that literally had about 400 models in it that I would have to set up every game, to playing War Machine where I think I maybe had 8 models. And obviously as that game got bigger than your force and as infantry became more prevalent, it took longer to set up and play, but it was a refreshing change. I mean, Steve, you're a massive fan of skirmish games, as your wallet knows. What would you, if you were to sell someone a Kill Team, for example, what would you say is the benefits to playing that over, say, playing regular 40k or War Machine or something?
I covered it a little bit in the last one, but yeah, I mean, it really is the time commitment and the variety of forces and the size. You don't need a massive amount of terrain to be able to have a really good experience. You don't need a 6x4 set of terrain to really get that, which terrain can also be a barrier for me. I hate putting terrain together. You and I were talking about the other day. Cannot stand terrain. Cannot stand vehicles. I don't have to worry about either of those in a skirmish game. You're dealing with, single squads of, regular sized troops for the most part. Maybe with a hero, maybe occasionally with like a larger, 40 millimeter base, set, whatever. But by and large, it's just troops. So those are quick and easy to get together, and they fit in my patience level of assembly. Whereas if you're going to field a 2,000 point army, you're going to have vehicles. You're going to have things that are going to be a pain in the butt to put together and to paint as well. And that's where my patience runs thin in this day and age. It's just that some people don't mind it. I have a really tough time with it. And honestly, I would pay someone. If I really wanted to play, I would pay someone to do it for me. And that's quite a chunk of change.
I've got a tank thing for 40k waiting to be assembled, Steve. I could send that to you if you want.
Hey, Iain, if you want to get a side gig, I'll be happy to send you some stuff to
put your daughter to work.
I've actually offered her money to paint some Space Marines for me, and she keeps saying she's going to take me up on it, but
Never does.
Not yet. Never does.
Clearly got too much money.
No, she hasn't. she has a very expensive
or too much
lifestyle.
pride. I don't know which one is it.
Yeah, I think it's the fear that her friends will find out that she's painting Space Marines for money, though it's worth selling drugs or painting your dad's plastic models.
I mean, it's a pretty good side hustle for making money. I mean, let's face it.
I've seen loads of people online, who they charge a lot of money for, well, in fairness, for producing a very good finalized product, and there's a lot of hours go into it. And what really frustrates me is when you see somebody who says, "Oh, I'm going to do commissions," and someone goes, "Oh God, I'd love you to paint my stuff. What are your rates?" Because they do this publicly on Twitter, and the person tells them the rates, like, "Oh my God, that's really expensive." Like, if you break that down by hour, it's probably not that expensive.
Not at all.
And there's you sort of moaning because someone's asking for $100 to paint 10 Space Marines for you that you don't have to assemble and paint yourself.
I've paid somebody to paint a few models of my War Machine army because it was just literally it was because my pile of shame was getting too shameful, and I was like, I'm never going to get through this. I need to.
You outsourced your shame.
I did outsource my shame, absolutely. And I got a very reasonable rate, if I'm honest. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think artists in general, I've seen a lot of people on Twitter advertising they'll paint or draw your D&D character or whatever, and the rates they're charging, and people are like, "Oh, that's a ridiculous amount of money," and you're like, it's not really. If you think about it, if you take the amount of hours of effort and the talent as well, because you're not just paying for time. You clearly can't do it. So just saying. You've got to be expecting at least, if it's not minimum wage, it needs to be above minimum wage by a chunk.
Right.
So
people need to realize. This is not going to Walmart and buying some mass-produced thing, right?
Exactly.
This is bespoke, custom work that you are commissioning a talented artisan or artist to do and put a bunch of time into. And you're bitching over the fact that when you math it out, they're probably getting less than minimum wage to do the work for you. Crazy. I mean, get over yourself.
I would get paid more if he took a job in Burger King, and you're like, "Oh my God, this is outlandish. I won't pay that." Like, good, well, go back to paint your own terrible models then.
Or just take a bunch of slave scavenging around your mate's house and press gang him into doing it. Hey, Ian.
Hey, you volunteered. And I believe you said, "Oh, this is fun. I've not done this in years." And I'm like, "Yeah, buddy, this is the first one. You've not seen how many I've got in this bag."
It wasn't fun by the time we got to the end of it, I'm telling you.
Once the RSI set in, and you're like, "I can't move my wrist anymore. Keep painting, Downey. Need another 10 done by tomorrow."
Absolutely.
I actually timed myself, and I'm very proud to say I can paint to a tabletop standard 40 Skaven an hour. That's my...
40 Skaven an hour?
They're tiny.
Well, I know they're tiny, but...
You work on a kind of 3 colour basis. You need brown, you need a kind of flesh colour, you need an armour colour, well, 4. An armoury colour and whatever the tunics are.
Yeah.
That's why all my Skaven slaves had yellow tunics.
After the first hour, you never want to see another Skaven in your life because you just painted 40 Skaven an hour.
Why are we not playing high elves?
Well, so that's the thing you said about your tolerance level, Steve, about when there's got vehicles in it and things like that. And mine's mass infantry. I hate painting multiple versions of the same guy. So whether that's a squad of Space Marines or more recently it's a squad of Knights Exemplar from my Menoth force or whatever, admittedly they're white, and that I should never have chosen white as a predominant colour for an army. But it's just the mass production of it, where you sit there and go, right, let's get the white out, boom, 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 and then you get the purple out, and you do that, and then the metal, and I'd rather paint something that was a one-off nowadays, I think. And
that's another side benefit of a skirmish game, is a lot of the time in these skirmish games, every single miniature, even in the same force, is different, right? Different poses, or different, like... If you play a Marvel game, they're all completely different Marvel characters, right? If you play that new Mythos game I just said about, there's 5 or 6 in a kit, they're all completely different, unique characters, right? Even in the 40k ones, yes, they're the same faction, but they're all in different poses, and several of them are heroes that give you that sort of palette cleanser, but they're all they're all different. So you're not like mass painting the same miniature 40 times over. So there's another advantage for that, because I also cannot stand mass painting the same miniature 40 over time. Like, that would drive me bonkers. Again, I'm not obviously not the average wargamer. I just time is valuable to me, and I paint what I want to paint is I want to paint bits and pieces at a time, get to a good level of quality, and put it down and come back another day. I'm not your average, person who's in the hobby in that area, because I don't have the patience for it anymore.
It's get them on the table as quick as possible, in my opinion. You say about tabletop standard painting, none of my stuff is really above that. It's just I want them good enough that I'm not going to be ashamed to put them on a table. But just as a confession, it has been 2 years since I last painted them. In 2 years,
I have to say, it's one thing that disappointed me a bit about the new War Machine minis, that this is 2022. They're relaunching their game line, and their biggest competition is Warhammer 40,000. And one of the big things about 40k, love it or hate it, is you can very much make the army into your guys, because you get these kits and you can pose these people however you want and arm them with whatever weapons you want. And there's a lot of repetition of monopose miniatures in the new War Machine box sets. It's like the same guy repeated a couple of times. And to Steve's point, that makes painting them pretty boring, because you're like, oh, look, it's Corporal Jones, number 3.
Yeah,
great.
I think in my Adrian's, there's like 10 guys in a unit, and I think that there are 4 poses.
I had that when painting trenchers for my Signar army. It's like, oh, here's the guy throwing a grenade. Here's the guy holding his rifle. Reminds
me when I used to get the Airfix kits. So the Airfix soldiers, the 148 scale Airfix, 132 Airfix soldiers.
Yeah.
And there was always
of those as a kid.
Yeah, always the guy with the Thompson in one hand and the grenade in the other. And, yeah.
Yeah, the Iwo Jima guy.
Yeah. And then, of course, he'd have his German equivalent. He would have his, exactly the same German stick grenade. Exactly the same pose, just, grey plastic, not, green.
I had that in my Africa Corps set. I had a Desert Rat set and an Africa Corps set. And, of course, there was the same guy in each set.
Just different colour.
Just a different colour. Yeah. There was the khaki-coloured one and the grey one. Yeah. And I bet if you bought a, Battle of Wake Island one, you'd have an American guy and a Japanese guy in the same poses.
Absolutely.
Well, speaking of sort of bespoke, different posed miniatures, something I wanted to give a shout out to was and I'm doing this from a Horus Heresy perspective, you can go on Forge World or Games Workshop's website, and one of the big joys of Horus Heresy is, a bit like historical wargaming, is customizing your guys to look like the Legion that you're painting. So Steve talked about it in the last podcast, but in Horus Heresy, it's set during this galactic civil war. There's 18 Space Marine legions, 9 on each side, and they've all got a kind of unique look and feel. And you ultimately could feel just like normal Space Marines and paint them in whatever colour you wanted and say, these are Legion X, or you could just keep them grey and you could be any Legion you wanted. But part of the fun is getting Legion iconography and uniform types. And Games Workshop and Forge World sell these little upgrade kits you can buy. Except it's one of those ones that's really hard to justify the purchase. It's like, oh wow, $30 for 10 pauldrons. That's a good purchase. I'm sure it's easy to justify. However, I had somebody send me on Twitter, because I think I was talking to someone about this. Etsy is the place to go if you want to get very, very affordable unit upgrades for your Horus Heresy forces, and I presume other games as well. There's one seller I decided to, prior to this podcast, to do a test purchase. And there's a guy, his shop is called Unsafe Graphics, and I'll put a link to his Etsy in the show notes. And I bought a bunch of legs and heads for my Sons of Horus. They're not called that, obviously, because you can't call it that for copyright reasons. And the quality is mind-blowingly good. The thing that really impressed me is these things come with a range of motion So like when you're posing the models and putting together, it looks like they're moving, it looks like they're running or diving for cover or something like that, which you don't really get with the generic stuff. But I then started looking at loads of other stuff. There are tons of like independent sellers there on Etsy making resin or hard plastic components for use, or 3D printed components for use in various well-known gaming systems. They're obviously called slightly different things, but the quality is amazing. I can't speak for obviously every single seller on Etsy. I'm just saying this one particular one, but I was really impressed.
Yeah, and I can see that taking off more and more with the sort of 3D printing becoming more prevalent and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, I've toyed with the idea. I borrowed a 3D filament printer from a friend of mine a little while ago, and I didn't do much with it, and I was, it was hard to set up. But some of the newer printers, the resin printers and things like that, some of the quality of stuff you can get out of them is fantastic. And if you can stand the fumes, because apparently there's a bit of a hoo-ha about the fumes and things like that, I am tempted to get one for the new man cave whenever that happens. And I no reason to print anything, just want to, and it'll look cool.
Funny story about that sort of stuff. I saw this online, and I always love when there's drama in the sort of role-playing miniature hobby space, because it really gives a really settling perspective in life. Like, is this what you're worried about? Literally, inflation's at an all-time high. People are living with energy poverty. There's a war going on in Ukraine, and people get outraged about plastic goblins. But there was a thread on a forum, and it was about somebody who's saying, "I'm new to Horus Heresy, and I want to get started in it. Any good resources?" And loads of really helpful people posting stuff. He then posted like, "Thanks very much, guys. This is great. I'm in the X area. I'm looking for games clubs nearby. Would anyone recommend any?" So a bunch of guys started recommending, "Oh yeah, we're in that area. Come along. We play on a Tuesday night. Bring your forces, and we can show you how to get started." And then he posted and said, "Thing is, I don't have any Horus Heresy specific models yet. I play 40k. I've got Space Marines. Are you guys cool if I just use them to represent the forces?" And people are like, "Yeah, sure. We want new players. Come along. I'm sure you'll end up buying other stuff." And then there was just one guy, and he just posted, "No, not on my life." And I'm like, I need to refresh this page because I want to see why this guy is so outraged. And then I was not disappointed, because there's a page that goes on, and he's like, "This, in case you're not aware, this is like Warhammer 40k's equivalent of historical wargaming. This is a game where the legions that you are playing represent a very specific historical time period. They have specific colour schemes, they have specific heraldry, they look a certain way. You cannot turn up with your Warhammer 40,000 Space Marines and expect to play in the same game. This is outrageous. I would never allow it." My God, who is this guy? Why is he so concerned? And I wanted to post, it's not historical. It's all made up. It's set 30,000 years in the future. It's not real. Nobody is going to come and go, "Well, I was a veteran of the Battle of Calv. I'm really upset that you didn't accurately reflect my unit." Come on, people, it's not real.
That is madness. I can understand people, if you're recreating Waterloo, as I've mentioned before, they're making sure, I'm sorry, that Prussian unit didn't arrive until X. But as you say, it's historical. That's fine. There's a difference. It's reenactment or recreation rather than a game. But Warhammer in its entirety, whether it's 40,000 fantasy battle, I don't care. That's made up stuff.
It did make my day though. I'm going to see if I can find the thread and put up a link to it in the show notes.
Clearly mad for that guy, right?
Sad gatekeeping. It is. I wouldn't say it's worse, because there's worse gatekeeping in the hobby by far. There's a whole other topic, but that's pretty sad gatekeeping.
Yeah, we should do an episode on gatekeeping in D&D. That could be a 3-hour long extravaganza. That's the word, Steve, is gatekeeping. You want new people to come in and enjoy the hobby, and you're like, "Take that nonsense away from here."
I'd probably be gatekeeping against that guy. I'd probably make sure I turned up with a 40k force that probably wasn't painted, probably wasn't accurate to the codex, and just
turn up with some Malifaux models. Like,
yeah, something like that. Yeah, also, yeah, absolutely.
A Blood Bowl
or
team.
Infinity models or something, Yeah, these guys are sci-fi,
Yeah, they've got guns and armour.
Uh,
You'd be pleased, though, I was very mature and I didn't put
I
anything
find that
up
hard
there.
to believe.
Part of me was tempted to parody him and then make it really look like it was a parody, but no, I was like, no, I'm gonna be an adult for a change.
First time for everything. Yeah. How did it feel?
Yeah, first time. Yeah,
I'm sure there were plenty of people who did it for you, Ian.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not as much fun as being petty though. Petty, there's a lot to be said for pettiness. Anyway, we are coming up. Well, actually, we're coming up to the hour mark. We are over the hour mark. I think the last one went on for long and weary. So, do you have any closing thoughts on mini wargaming? Any closing wisdom you want to share with the masses? Steve, you're nodding in a very wise way.
It is a rabbit hole. Obviously, we mostly talk about tabletop RPGs, but as you can tell, we're all super passionate about this topic as well. It is adjacent, and if people want to just experience a different facet and get to know a different style of gaming on the tabletop that is close enough to your D&Ds and stuff, but different enough that you want to just use your brain in a slightly different way, I highly recommend it. And I mean, the painting aspect of it obviously has a direct translation to D&D minis too, right? Is you're gonna learn the same similar skills in painting and have the same supplies to paint D&D minis or whatever tabletop game you want if you're playing with friends around a table. So there's a lot of overlap there that I think really helps and benefits. And again, you can get into these games very cheaply as well, or you can spend thousands of dollars on it. That you can go to any degree you like. And I think I highly recommend people trying it out if they want a change of pace or a palate cleanser from, really hardcore RP. So,
and if they don't fancy a palate cleanser, what's to say you can't do a big battle in your D&D game and use a miniature war game to do it? Okay,
Hey, like it.
There you go. You see, so this is the thing. D&D and all your role playing games, you're focusing on a one character, one kind of thing. And who hasn't had a battle in D&D that their character's been a part of? Okay, and you could do that with any of these systems, or there's some of them that are more specific than others. I know that there are Star Trek games out there. Modiphius do a Star Trek role playing game, and there are Star Trek ship battle games out there, right? You can use the two if you fancy just a bit of it, as you say, change of scale probably is more appropriate rather than change of pace. So that's another option. I mean, I got into miniature war gaming first before I gave it. It was the gateway to role playing, and I still can't give it up. It scratches an itch that role playing doesn't scratch, and as Steve said, I'd recommend anybody who does role playing hasn't tried the miniature wargaming side, just give it a try. As I said, there's plenty of new skirmish ones out there getting very cheap. You can even use the miniatures again in your D&D sessions, as Steve's alluded to. So it's not like you're going to be wasting a huge amount of money. Give it a try. It's good fun. It is very nerdy, and I'm very much happy to get my nerd on with this shit.
I think the other thing to mention is that Jason and I keep talking about being painting snobs. I am not a great painter.
Oh, so I am.
enjoy.
Don't think so.
You are very good at it. You do yourself down. You are very artistic, despite your shaking of the head and laughing at the moment.
I can barely see the models anymore, Ian.
Yeah, but that's only because you're 98. If you put your glasses on and get a massive magnifying glass. But you know how to draw, you know how to paint. But all that talk about snobbery aside, I just like painting because I don't like fielding armies of grey plastic. It is very, very easy. There's so many options now. If you want to paint these and make them look okay, there's lots of really, really simple techniques you can do without having to have like a surgeon's hand-eye coordination to be able to do this. There's paints out there that make it easy for you. There's washes out there that make it easy for you. And you can actually paint models to a fairly decent standard in quite a quick turnaround. So that's one thing I know that always puts people off, but don't let that put you off. It's very easy to make your stuff look palatable is probably the correct word.
I would say though, don't expect your models to be golden demon standard out of the case, right?
No,
I've seen some people on some of the Facebook groups, D&D Facebook groups that I'm on, and things like that. They post pictures of these models. They're really super proud of their first attempt to paint these models. More power to them. Practice is what's important, and these things look good, and they're proud of them, and that's how it should be. But I've seen people try and take them down over it, and you're like, it goes back to this gatekeeping thing. It's like, come on, guys, you didn't start painting and immediately you could paint an army and it looked great, right? You had to learn,
right?
Yeah, you had to learn to put, you had to put your base coat on, you put your washes, your highlights, and yeah, you probably got fairly good at it, but you didn't do it overnight. So don't expect miracles, but some things like the contrast paints make things a lot easier. Null Oil and Agrax Earthshade is basically talent in a bottle. They are absolutely talent in a bottle. You just slap that stuff on and instantly your model will look better. Within limits, obviously, but yeah.
There's, I'd say, one thing for new painters, the one thing that I learned that changed how I painted. If you're brand new to painting, look up how to thin your paints, because nothing makes your painting look better than actually thinning the paints. A lot of the time, if you try and paint straight from the bottle, it looks kind of a bit
clumpy,
chunky, clumpy, chunky, one of those. But if you learn to thin your paints, you can actually make them look okay. Get a nice smooth finish. And on that note, we will leave you all until we do our next podcast. So, gents, thank you again for joining me, and we will speak to everyone soon.
Cool.
And that was our second miniature wargaming episode. We hope you enjoyed it. We're a monthly podcast about the history of tabletop RPGs, although we do all sorts of other stuff now. We've got some actual plays, we've got interviews, and we've got discussions like this where we talk about associated trades. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on Twitter at SavePodcast, or you can find us on Facebook by searching for Roll to Save. You can also email us at roll.to.save.pod@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.